Well, we were coming into the port off the ferry and got to Seyðisfjörður, where all of the motorcycles, really exciting because everyone was getting off on our motorcycles and getting in line and following out of getting off the ferry. And this town we hardly could see it, to be honest, because we were just following all the motorcycles through the town, and we were heading to this town, Egilsstaðir, because all the motorcycles wanted to get their fuel and pick up some groceries. They were ready. Most of them were on adventure bikes, so we knew that everyone would be heading off in all different directions. But on this particular road, I think it was the 93, it was foggy, and it climbed up to some high elevation, so we were just following all the motorcycles, and of course all the other vehicles were following behind us through this high elevation, very foggy, and lots of corners and turns and switchbacks, until we dropped into Egilsstaðir, which is a larger town than this one, and they had a gas station, so all the motorcycles were piling in, and there was coffee and picking up food and something to eat and whatnot, getting all their fuel ready. Lots of camaraderie and joking around. We met a couple there that was also from Canada. They were from Quebec, but they weren't camping like us. They were going to be steeping in lodgings. But most of the people that we saw were looking like they were going to be camping out and about, just like we were. But the plan was to get some groceries here, which we did. Very different than we had in Norway, because it was all different food in Iceland. So we had to look around the store and figure out what are we going to buy and what can we use this for. Which is always exciting when you get to a new country, and figuring out the language, because there is some similarity to Norwegian, but yet it is very different. And then we were going to look for our campsite, so we decided to head north. On our trips, we don't really have a plan at all. We just look at a map when we get somewhere and decide, okay, well, we're going to be heading north, so let's just go this way. Which we did, and we had seen that there was a campsite on this map here, so we thought, well, let's just go to that campsite and set up. It's very exciting to be our first time in this massive, beautiful country. While we were setting up our camp at this campsite, getting our chairs out and putting together the new tent and having something to eat, Andrew was working on the motorcycles, because this was about 6:30 at night by the time he started to fix up the motorcycles. The GPS wasn't working well, so he needed to work on that and do some electrical work. I went exploring and down around the campsite and looking out at the water, and other family members and campers were coming and parking. They were on vacation from Iceland, Icelandic families, so they were setting up their campsites, and there was a couple on tandem bike. They were from Germany, and they set up their camp as well. And they boarded our chairs so that they could have a little rest. They were traveling pretty light. And then we were just planning on what we were going to do for the next day and where we were going to go in which direction, pretty well looking at the map and watching the sunset on our first night in Iceland.
We got up in the morning, heading towards the 917, which was a twisty road that went over the mountains. Unfortunately, the morning was foggy, it was wet, damp, the road was full of potholes on the way, and before we got to the base of the mountain, we saw this Jeep coming towards us. The guy had his hand, he was waving frantically at us. I thought it must be some kind of accident or something. So we stopped, and he said that he had just come over the mountain. And the fog was so thick he could barely see his front hood in front of him. So he said to us that there's no way in the world you should be going over there. So we kind of thought about it. He left. We kind of sat there for a few minutes, and then decided that it'd be crazy to go over the top, because if you go over the top when it's foggy like that, you don't see the view anyways. So we turned around, back down the road, and looked for the campsite. And luckily one wasn't too far away, and we pulled in. And then the next morning we thought, well, we'll head out again.
Well, so far what we noticed about these roads in Iceland was that the roads were pitched on either side. They were kind of elevated off the ground, and hence there weren't really any pull-out zones, or at least they didn't seem to exist. Once on the road, there's very few places to pull over because of that, unless you're on one of the off-road routes, which then there was. You could just pull over onto the side. We noticed that there's little flora and fauna, and the ground is really black or like charcoal in color, and it's probably due to the volcanic rock that's mostly everywhere. We didn't see many trees except at our campsite, and when in Iceland you must use designated camping sites as there's no wild camping allowed. This is, of course, to protect the scarce floral and fauna you can see around us. So it's understandable. We really loved riding these roads so far and decided, hey, it's time to test our bikes and ourselves and head south to Ostia, which is an area that you could only get to using off-road routes. So we were about to point our bikes in that direction and try to find a campsite that was close to the trailhead that we had seen on a map. So that was our plan after we went off the 917. And here we go, looking for our campsite and looking for more adventure in Iceland.
We were riding on Highway 917 and then started to... No,
We turned, okay.
then
You
turned
know what
on
we
to...
did? We went on to 917 to Highway 1.
Yeah. I thought maybe a more colorful way to say it.
Oh,
We were on...
cut.
We were on Highway 917 and then went on to Highway 1. And at that point we were looking for a place to camp. And
Well, we knew that we were heading for the campsite that was off Highway 1 because it was on the road that would take us to the off-road route to Ostia. And the campsite was called Möðrudalur in Icelandic. And we were really excited when we found it because
yeah, the campsite was really cool.
yeah,
It's not like anything we had seen before.
well, it was Icelandic, so they had
Very Icelandic.
They had some historic, some buildings that were built in the traditional old way, which is using the sod as the wall. So then in the old days, they would use the sod because they didn't have trees. They would use the sod and rock to build the foundations and the walls, and then they would gather driftwood. And this, of course, wasn't driftwood because it was contemporary. But in the old days, they would gather driftwood from the shore, some that came from Canada. And they would build the rooftops with that and then put sod on the roof as well.
And some of them, they would actually dig underneath the earth and just put sod on top and use that as their kitchen area or sleeping areas.
Yeah,
They're very interesting.
In the old days. Not now.
Not for the campsite, no. But the campsite, actually, they did use some of the air. They used one kitchen that did go.
They did
that
show
was underground
a
that you
rock.
could use for cooking.
Yeah, and that's where we cooked our meals. But they also had a little cafe there because it was a tourist spot, and there was really lovely lodgings that you could stay there. People do. There were tour buses that came and stayed there. But we, of course, were with the campers in the campground with the small outdoor bathrooms and the dugout kitchen that we could use.
But I have to say, they did have a restaurant there, a cafe.
Yeah.
And one of my favorites was it was like a Icelandic donut.
Yeah.
Like a small twisted donut. And I think if I remember correctly, it was called a kleinut.
Yeah.
In Icelandic.
Yeah.
They were great.
And in Norwegian, it would be fattigmann. So basically a donut, a cake kind of pastry that's deep fried, rolled and kind of knotted and deep fried, and then it's tossed in sugar and or without sugar. And it was nice to have the cafe because we could go and sit inside at night and have a cup of tea and have a donut because it wasn't warm. The weather in Iceland when we were there was the sort of a record year of bad weather.
It was not
for
warm
summer.
at all.
So it was nice to go in there and have that, but it was really cool.
And we were actually thinking about what we were going to do the next day because we had in our mind that we were going to head to Asja, volcanic area, which was only about 80 kilometers away from the campsite, but we knew ahead of time that it wasn't going to be an easy 80 kilometers, so we were kind of apprehensive about it.
Especially me.
Yeah, well, we both were.
Yeah.
Didn't know what to expect.
So that was our night and our camping for that one night. And then in the next day we were heading off to Asja. But we had a really nice visit at the camp.
It's very nice.